I'm catching up once again with a gentleman I caught up with, I think it was about 12, 18 months ago. Mr. Tom Sykes, The Years of Travelling Anxiety is his new book. Tom, thank you so much for joining me in the studio this morning.
Thanks for having me, and good to see you again.
Now, first of all, I just want to catch up with you because obviously you're part of the university. Tell us a bit about your role here at the university to start with, please, Tom.
Yeah, so my title here is Associate Professor in Creative Writing and Global Journalism, which is long-winded, but it does sort of capture kind of what I'm interested in terms of the writing that I do and the teaching and the research that I do. So I'm broadly interested in, sort of various sort of telling true stories through travel writing and memoir and journalism, really, and that's what I try and teach my students to do, really. So
talking about your brand new book, which has just come out, The Years of Travelling Anxiety, a travel writer's search for peace of mind. Tell us a bit about the book to start with.
Yeah, so it's something between a memoir in the sense it's sort of based on my own experiences and a travelogue. So there's quite a lot of, it's based around three quite major trips that I've done in the last few years.
Yep.
That have kind of triggered various kinds of anxiety, and it's really about trying to solve a puzzle as to sort of why I get anxious and why people get anxious when they travel. And I think there is some kind of obvious triggers that your listeners will be kind of familiar with, when you're kind of scrambling to try and catch a train or a plane, or you're kind of dealing with some annoying bureaucrat who won't give you the visa or just takes ages over kind of going over your passport. But so that's dealt with in the book. But for me, there's also the more interesting and sort of complicated aspect of that is situations where there hasn't been any kind of good reason to get anxious, but I've had quite a severe panic attack, so I've suddenly your heart's beating at a kind of ludicrous speed and your throat's going dry and you can't breathe and you don't know what's going on. All these strange thoughts are kind of swirling around in your head. So it's trying to get to the bottom of that, really.
There's people listening this morning that will probably be nodding at the radio now saying, that's me. There's a lot of people who, when they are making a journey, whether they're going away, maybe they're going on holiday, looking forward to the holiday, but it's actually getting there. That's the part that they get very anxious about. And I know a lot of people who really struggle when they have to fly somewhere. And obviously they become very anxious. So although they're heading off on holiday and it's going to be the most amazing time ever, they're so anxious it takes the edge off the holiday before they start.
Yeah, this is true. I mean, fear of flying is a very common fear. It's funny that the fear of flying is that it's sort of inversely proportionate to the actual risk of flying. People should be much more worried about driving in a car, actually, if you were to look at the statistics and the danger of that. And I, the two of the trips that I recount in the book are to Nigeria. My wife's Nigerian, half my family Nigerian. Lagos is a city where the driving is quite chaotic, let's say, and there are kind of moments in that of being driven by someone who is, let's say, not really taking care on the road.
Yep. And
so there was a kind of a good reason to get anxious about sort of being in a car in those sort of very difficult circumstances. But with flying, it's interesting. Flying has never bothered me, really. I just kind of accept that I quite enjoy it. I just get into a book or catch up on films I haven't seen for a while.
Yeah.
So I'm a bit odd like that. I'm also someone that sort of, I've done quite a lot of travel in quite difficult circumstances. So I mean, I was reporting from Ivory Coast after their second civil war. So it wasn't a war zone, but it was still quite dicey. There was lots of militia still around, and there were areas where you had to avoid because there were kind of mines still in the ground and things like that. And that particular trip was 3 months I spent with a photographer there about 10 or 12 years ago. Didn't trigger anxiety in me. I just kind of somehow dealt with that.
Yep.
The puzzle for me, the mystery for me, is when I sort of sit down in a perfectly nice situation, having a few beers with some friends in, somewhere like the Philippines, where I used to live, and I have lots of connections and a sort of an academic interest in the Philippines. and it's going perfectly well, and suddenly I'm like, I'm having a panic attack, and I don't know why. And so it's and the answers are complicated. I think part of it is that sometimes when we feel anxiety, if it's not triggered by something obvious at that moment, it's because it's maybe a delayed reaction. In this case, it was grief over a friend who died a few months earlier. I hadn't really allowed myself to grieve at that time, so I'd sort of repressed that. And one of the theories about how anxiety works is that anxiety happens when you don't allow yourself to kind of naturally go through other sorts of emotions.
Yes. Yes. OK, listen, we're going to come back and find out more about the years of travelling anxiety with Tom Sykes, find out a little bit how he put the book together after starting to put this book together. Now, you know the tales that you want to tell, but how do you start putting it together? What would be the format that you would use to start writing this book?
Yeah, I suppose that because this book comes quite late, it's my 7th book, and I've been travelling for work, for writing, and for my sort of academic work for more than 20 years now. It was easy for me to sort of look back and pick out certain experiences that had been sort of coloured by anxiety.
Yep.
So that was the kind of organising principle for it, I guess. And then it was really a question of the difficulty was going back there and sort of recreating some quite difficult experiences and trying to get back into that kind of anxious mindset that I could describe it effectively in the book. I was
going to say, I mean, I flicked through the book. I have had a little read. I haven't read all of it, I must confess. However, one thing I can see is obviously some of those stories must have brought back some pretty tough memories for you.
Yeah, I mean, there would always be a period. I mean, a lot of the time I keep diaries and notes. I make notes at the time during the trip, but because most of those trips, their original kind of intention was not to end up writing a story about anxiety. That wasn't the angle. It was to, write a journalistic piece or write for a travel magazine or trying to focus on some other kind of subject matter. I didn't necessarily put in those diaries or those notebooks how I felt and my feelings of anxiety about those particular trips. So it did take each morning before I'd kind of start writing, I'd sort of spend a period of almost like just trying to kind of remember. Reflection, exactly. And sort of like, as it were, rewind my memories back to that moment and trying to think about, what are the symptoms, what kind of strange, crazy sort of thoughts fly around your head when you're in that kind of anxious zone. It was a sort of a unusual kind of process and one that I hadn't really used before for writing. But like I say, hopefully it has resulted in quite a kind of authentic sort of description of what it's like to have travel anxiety, basically. We were talking off air, and you're working on another book at the moment. This is your 7th book that you've obviously just had published. Writing, if you like, obviously is your career, it's your profession, but it's also a nice release for you as well to be able to find your own space. Yeah, I mean, I think in terms of there's quite a direct connection to it with anxiety because one of the remedies for anxiety that counsellors and specialists in the field. I'm not trained in mental health at all. I come at this as, one of the people who, as a patient, if you like, as a sufferer from it. So I certainly don't make any claims for expertise, but in the book it does include some advice from various people who do have expertise, and one of those ideas is this idea of the flow state, which you can get into by it's where you kind of let go of all your kind of worries and your thoughts about the day-to-day problems and anxieties of life. People achieve it through painting, through playing an instrument. People often talk about how when we're kids and we go off and sort of play. I mean, it's difficult nowadays. I mean, as a sort of father of a young child, it'd be dangerous for them to go running around the streets of Portsmouth. But I was very lucky to grow up on Hayling Island in quite a rural area. So me and my brother would just go off wandering all day. Yep. And you totally lose track of time, and you're in this kind of in this world that is very, very, sort of mental space. It's very, very kind of detached from the day-to-day life. And when you're a kid, you're not even reminded of reality until your mum calls you in for tea or something, in the evening, right? So that writing does that for me. It's a kind of, it puts me into a kind of flow state of mind. And it's also one of the messages of the book that, creativity and, focusing on activities that kind of give you some joy and some relief is a way of kind of, stopping anxiety or kind of
absolutely
remedying it. Yeah.
Very quickly, what's your new book that you're writing now? What's the topic of that particular book?
Yeah, well, it's a different theme, but it in a way it does connect to the Years of Travelling Anxiously, because one of the arguments I make in the Years of Travelling Anxiously is that anxiety is not necessarily an unusual or extraordinary state of mind to be in, given that we live in a world that is increasingly anxious or gives us more and more reasons to be anxious.
Yep.
Social and economic reasons, whether it's the sort of nature of kind of precarious work, whether it's the kind of cost of living crisis, financial worries that a lot of people have, it's
absolutely.
The chaos in the Middle East, etc., etc. So the next book is to look at maybe some of the kind of material reasons why people get anxious, and it's called, the working title is The Austerity Expedition. And it's a kind of, myself and a photographer, my colleague Alex Sebley, are going to sort of travel around Britain and just try and investigate people's experiences of debt and cost of living and frugality, and just again try and bring a kind of perspective onto that comes from someone who sort of travels and meets people and interacts with people and communities in that way. So.
Fantastic. Listen, Tom, thank you for joining me this morning.
Thanks
the
for having
Years
me.
of Travelling Anxiously, a travel writer's search for peace of mind. Where can people obtain this book from, Tom?
Well, I suppose in all good bookshops and probably some not very good ones as well. All the usual online places that we probably shouldn't advertise necessarily.
We won't advertise them, but you know where we mean.
If you Google it, you'll find it. Yeah.
Listen, Tom, thank you so much for coming in this morning. And if you've woken up this morning and you're feeling a little anxious for whatever reason, and you think that the world could be against you, just stop for a second, because it just goes to show that there is a window out there that you can look at, head through, and maybe you could put something down on paper and you could be a writer as well. Tom, thank you so much for coming in this morning.
Thanks for having me. Cheers, Ian. Good to see you.
Okay, coming up shortly, we're going to drop a track into the playlist from Estelle. We are just about 14 minutes away from Mr. Paul Marsh and Casey Major Bunce. They're going to be taking over at the top of the hour, 10 a.m.
Express.